It's been over 60 years since JFK was assassinated in Dallas.
The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it. And one path we shall never choose, and that is the path of surrender.
Let's retrace JFK's final moments from the day before his assassination to his assassination day, from November 21st to November 22nd.
We are at the Orlando airport and we're going to be heading to Dallas with National Geographic to cover JFK One Day in America. And my goal at the end of this is to be able to find out all of the last things that JFK did.
What was the last suit that he was wearing? What was the last breakfast he had? What was his last beer? And also some more serious stuff. Why Dallas? What was going on in that city? It had the nickname as the City of Hate. Why? And why did JFK insist on going and getting close to the people? You're watching Hot for History, where we get to share some unique perspective on weird history facts that I bet your teachers never taught you in school.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
So I am at what used to be the Texas Hotel, which is the place that JFK stayed when the day that he was shot. And the night before he was shot. So his room, which was 850, doesn't exist anymore. So his room is now split up into rooms 810 and some other rooms. But I got one of the rooms that he stayed in.
It was November of 1963, 60 years ago, when JFK was assassinated in Dallas. The reason why Dallas was so important was that they barely won Dallas in 1960.
The cause of all mankind is the cause of America.
And the re-election was coming in 1964. They wanted to make a good impression. The times were very, very tough. And to understand what was going on in Dallas, it's good to have perspective as to what the energy, what the political climate was at the time, both globally and in Dallas, which they had called the City of Hate, even before JFK's assassination. What was happening globally in 1963 that made things so tense? Kennedy was very concerned that America was going to be attacked because of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and there was just this tension of anxiety everywhere. School children were learning how to duck and cover because of this threat of nuclear war. His administration did result in the peaceful resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was also able to balance out any kind of escalation from the Berlin crisis of 1961. However, his policies also led to this Bay of Pigs invasion and the escalation of the Vietnam War. When he came into his presidency, he got rid of a lot of people, but he did keep J. Edgar Hoover from the FBI, who was not really a fan of the Kennedy brothers, and Allen Dulles, the director of Central Intelligence, who was connected to Dulles Airport and Texas. Now, at the time, the CIA's credibility was in the tank. And because of that, Allen Dulles, who had the Texas connection, was replaced in 1961. Now, Kennedy was really afraid of a nuclear war, and he had to negotiate things with Nikita Khrushchev, especially with the supplies that Russia had been giving Cuba. That was resolved, but not everybody liked that. There were many people that despised Kennedy. All of this drama internationally, the war, the Cuban Missile Crisis, threat of nuclear attack in the midst of all that, and then locally, there were the civil rights, especially in Texas, which JFK barely won in 1960. Dallas was radical. They were extreme in the sense of not really accommodating civil rights, and they resisted JFK because they despised the fact that he was Catholic. One of the wealthiest men in the world was this guy, Oilman H.L. Hunt. He formed this very angry anti-Kennedy movement, and it began to grow, especially in Dallas. Then there was ex-Army General Edwin A. Walker, who had been relieved of command by Kennedy for brainwashing his troops about the John Birch Society propaganda. And once he was relieved of his post, he was ticked off, went right to Texas to lead his new anti-Kennedy campaign. He was welcomed by the mayor and given an honorary Stetson in front of thousands thousands of people. They thought that Kennedy worshipped a very dangerous foreign religion, which made him sympathetic to foreign influence. They thought he was spending the country into bankruptcy, and they accused him of buying votes from the minority. He wanted to expand health care with Medicare proposals, and they thought he was plotting to surrender the sovereignty of the United States to the United Nations. One of the worst and almost spooky quotes was by this Reverend Criswell, who was the leader of Dallas's First Baptist Church. And he had already spoken on civil rights, but he said, let them integrate. Let them sit up there in their dirty shirts and make all their fine speeches. But they are all a bunch of infidels dying from the neck up. I personally feel is almost like a foreshadowing. Ex-General Edwin Walker was eventually arrested for sedition and insurrection on Kennedy's personal orders for instigating a riot in Ole Miss. But Walker still had a lot of fans and allies in Texas, and they thought Kennedy had betrayed the country. Dallas had been the national headquarters of the KKK since the 1920s, and this was going on even into the early 1960s. And Dallas was one of the last American cities holding out against complying with the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education to desegregate schools. Dallas had become this city of hate. And what Kennedy didn't know is that there were warnings for him not to go. 2 weeks before he was there, Adlai Stevenson was attacked and hit on the head with a play card. There was a bomb threat against Martin Luther King Jr., who came to speak in the city in early 1963. And when Kennedy arrived, Dallas Morning News had a full-page advertisement accusing him of being a communist sympathizer. And then General Walker's troops had distributed thousands of handbills on the street of Dallas picturing Kennedy on a wanted poster with a message that said, wanted for treason. And then Kennedy was killed. Let's discuss JFK's schedule and the last moments of his life and all of the little details of things that he did that day. First thing in the morning, the day before his assassination on November 21st, at 9:15, JFK would say goodbye to Caroline, his daughter, for the last time as she headed off to school. At 10:50, he helicoptered with Jackie over to Andrews Air Force Base, and John Jr. was with them. He loved helicopters, so he took the ride along with him. They took off for San Antonio in Air Force One at 11:05. He spoke in San Antonio, then he went off to Houston at the Rice Hotel. A guy named Rudy Castro served him, and the food was chicken Virginia, green beans, rolls, and pumpkin pie. He would go over to the Coliseum and speak for Albert Thompson for his advocacy and his ability to build the Johnson Space Center. Following that and into that evening in Houston, he had champagne and his favorite beer, which was Heineken. They got on their plane and headed off to Fort Worth, where they would stay in the Hotel Texas, which is now known as the Fort Worth Hilton.
JFK gave his very last outdoor spontaneous speech in this spot in the morning about 8:45 of November 22nd, 1963. And following this talk that he gave, he would head over to a breakfast over in the hotel, and then just a few hours later, he was assassinated.
Before heading up to his room, which was room 850, which now is room 810, 808, and 806.
Very underwhelming.
Jackie and the president retired for the evening.
So these beds are replicas of the beds that were in the original suite on the 8th floor. So the last bed that he slept in.
Inside of the suite were all of these amazing pieces of artwork from Van Gogh, from Picasso.
Oh, welcome to come on in. 2-bedroom, 3-bath.
That the art center had hung in the room so that they could see and be surrounded by amazing art while they were in Texas. The next morning, JFK gets up around 7 a.m. He puts on his last suit, was the Brooks Brothers suit, along with Brooks Brothers underwear, Christian Dior tie, which would be the tie he'd be wearing when he was shot in the neck. He went out and he spoke to a large crowd adjacent to the hotel into the parking lot. This would be his last outdoor speech. And then he entered into the Crystal Ballroom of the Hotel Texas, where he was surrounded by members of the Chamber of Commerce, and he had a breakfast of 2 soft-boiled eggs, toast, bacon, orange juice, and coffee, which was his favorite breakfast. He stood up and he gave a speech. He made a joke about Jackie. Then he was given a hat, a Stetson, and a pair of boots. And he said his goodbyes, and Jackie and Jack and Lyndon Johnson and his wife, the Connollys, and the Secret Service staff headed off to fly from Fort Worth to Dallas. Jackie's suit was this American version of Chanel. She had to wear American clothes, so this was Chez Nignon, which in partnership with Chanel did use Chanel buttons, some Chanel materials. She wore this pink suit with a navy blue shirt, gloves, and a pillbox hat.
Nobody wonders what Lyndon and I wear, but
this would be the last suit that JFK saw his wife in. So they headed onto the tarmac. Jackie was greeted with red roses, which was unusual because most of the time she was greeted with yellow roses because of the yellow roses of Texas. They got into their last car, which was the Lincoln Continental with the top down, which would be one of the last bad decisions that they made. They could have had the top up or down. It was drizzling slightly. One of their goals was to be close and have access to the public. The route that they decided to go down was a route that was decided upon just that week. Their route was also published in the paper. He heads into Dealey Plaza, he heads down Main Street, he heads down Houston, and then he takes a turn on Elm, in which they have to slow down. Across from that area where he's taking that left turn and he is waving, up on the 6th floor of the Texas Book Depository is Lee Harvey Oswald, and one shot is fired and they're all a little stunned, and it sort of graces the cheek of an innocent bystander, and they're kind of perplexed, but by the time they figure out what is happening, JFK then, with the second shot, is shot in the neck. Jackie tries to console him. He is wearing a back brace because of his back problems. Some people say that had he not had his back brace on, he would have just fallen over. And the neck injury, many of the doctors say he could have survived that. So then he was shot immediately after, right in the head.
JFK said his last words right here.
Clint Hill, the Secret Service person assigned to protect Jackie, jumps onto the back of the car to get Jackie back in the car because Jackie was trying to grab President's brains and his scalp. They realize what's happening, and the driver, Bill Greer, speeds off into Parkland Hospital. They know that he will not survive this, but he is still breathing. There is agonal breathing, are trying to get his respiratory correct, and then another doctor comes in and can see the massive effects of the head wound. And they know at that point that he will not survive. And by 12:57, he is dead. And he is pronounced dead around 1 o'clock.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
At the end of the parade route, Kennedy says his last words. Nellie Connolly turns to him and says, "Mr. President, they can't make you believe now that there are not some in Dallas who love and appreciate you, can they?" Kennedy's response, "No, they sure can't." You're watching Hot for History, where we get to share some unique perspective on weird history facts that I bet your teachers never taught you in school.